The chilling echo of a metallic clang reverberated through the suffocating silence of my apartment, slicing through the manufactured horror playing on my TV. It was just after 9 p.m., a time usually marked by the mundane rhythm of my mother's incessant calls, which I, in my self-imposed exile, routinely ignored. My life then was a murky blend of indifference and despair. A recent breakup, the shattering of a 5-year dream, had left me adrift, a ghost in my own home. My days were a monotonous cycle of work, silence, and the numbing embrace of my bed. Weekends were worse, an endless reel of forgotten meals and mind-numbing movies. This particular Saturday was no different. I was sprawled on the couch in my second-floor bedroom, the glow of the screen reflecting in my vacant eyes, barely registering the generic action flick flickering before me. The persistent vibrations from my phone, my mother's fourth attempt to connect, were a mere annoyance, easily dismissed. I knew she meant well, but the thought of articulating my brokenness, of hearing the usual questions about my well-being, was an unbearable burden. My escape into cinematic oblivion felt like a necessary anesthetic. The action movie, an indistinguishable blur of explosions and car chases, eventually lost its meager hold. With a sigh, I navigated back to the streaming menu, my finger hovering over the myriad of options. Nothing appealed, yet the compulsion to fill the void remained. My gaze settled on a horror movie, its thumbnail a grainy, indistinct image promising nothing more than forgettable jump scares. Perfect, I thought, something to lull me into unconsciousness. 20 minutes in, the film proved even worse than anticipated. The audio was a chaotic mess. Dialogue was a muffled whisper, forcing me to crank the volume, only for a sudden, ear-splitting sound effect to blast through the speakers, making me wince. Despite its abysmal quality, I let it play, too lethargic to seek another distraction. Then an anomaly. A sharp, metallic clang began to punctuate the film's already jarring soundscape. It was distinct, like a heavy pipe striking concrete, yet it bore no relation to the on-screen action. No metal objects were visible, no industrial settings hinted at. It simply appeared, every minute or so, a perfectly consistent, out-of-place echo, as if a faulty loop in the sound design. This meticulous repetition, coupled with the otherwise shoddy audio mix, made me question how such a poorly produced film had found its way onto a streaming platform. Its sheer awfulness, ironically, held a strange, morbid fascination. I found myself dissecting its flaws, a perverse form of entertainment, and a subconscious need to see how such a train wreck would conclude. Midway through this abysmal cinematic experience, a primal urge led me to the bathroom. Instinctively, I paused the movie, a small act of engagement that surprised me given my earlier detachment. Returning to my sanctuary of apathy, I reached for the remote, my thumb poised over the play button. Just as my finger descended, that sound, the same sharp, metallic clang, sliced through the quiet. But this time the movie was paused. A jolt of pure, unadulterated dread shot through me. The screen was frozen, the room devoid of artificial sound. Yet, the clang had been unmistakably real, impossibly clear, and it had emanated from within my own home. My breath hitched. It wasn't part of the movie. It had never been part of the movie. A cold wave of realization washed over me, the kind that freezes the blood in your veins and sends shivers down your spine. I remained motionless, a statue carved from fear, my eyes fixated on the unmoving image on the screen. I strained my ears, hoping, praying, that my mind had conjured the sound, a phantom echo of the film's faulty soundtrack. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own heart against my ribs. Then, 45 seconds later, it came again. The exact same clang, precise and unwavering. There was no denying it now. My mind, numbed by grief and detachment, had been brutally awakened. Adrenaline surged, cutting through the lethargy like a shockwave. I sprang to my feet, my hand instinctively grasping the forgotten utility knife from my desk. The dull gleam of its blade offered a fleeting illusion of safety. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful reminder of my vulnerability. A frantic room-by-room sweep of the house began. My gaze darted into every shadowed corner, behind every piece of furniture, searching for an intruder, for an explanation. Each room was empty, undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, no overturned objects, no lingering scent of a foreign presence. The house was exactly as I had left it, an unsettling testament to the unseen nature of the threat. As I ascended the stairs, the knife gripped tightly in my hand, the clang echoed again. This time, it was softer, a subtle shift in volume that indicated its origin. My bedroom, the very place I had been sitting moments before. This made no sense. I had been there. I had been watching. A chilling thought pierced through the fog of my panic. The windows. It was spring, and the unseasonably warm evenings had led me to crack them open, inviting in the cool night air. What if the sound hadn't been from inside the house at all? What if it had been coming from just outside this entire time? The thought, far from alleviating my fear, intensified it. The idea of something unseen lurking in the familiar darkness of my backyard, observing me, was infinitely more terrifying than a direct confrontation. My hand trembled as I crept towards the window, the old curtains whispering against the glass as I pushed them aside, just enough to peer into the inky blackness beyond. My breath caught in my throat. There, in the middle of my manicured lawn, perhaps 20 feet from the house, sat one of my weathered deck chairs, displaced from its usual spot on the patio. And standing beside it, a figure. Small. Too small to be an adult. A child. The darkness obscured any distinguishing features, but the silhouette was undeniably that of a young kid. In his hand, he held what appeared to be a PVC pipe, its dull glint barely perceptible in the dim light. The source of the metallic clang. As if sensing my gaze, the child turned, his form a silent, ominous sentinel in the moonless night. Then, with a deliberate, unsettling motion, he struck the pipe against the chair. The sharp, familiar clang, now tinged with a terrifying intimacy, echoed through the quiet night. I recoiled instantly, my body flooded with a primal, suffocating fear. It felt absurd, this terror of a child, but the sheer unnaturalness of the scene gnawed at me. What was he doing out there? Was he lost? Was there something wrong with him? The thought of him standing there for nearly an hour, a silent, watchful presence, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. Perhaps he was lost, a wandering child from a nearby home. But then, the insidious logic of my own mind began to dismantle this comforting narrative. If he were truly lost, wouldn't he have rung my doorbell, or called out for help through the open window? And even if fear had silenced him, opting for the bizarre tactic of banging a pipe against my patio furniture, would he persist for an entire hour? The questions swirled, each more unsettling than the last, culminating in a chilling realization. This wasn't a lost child. This was a trap. My gut screamed at me, a visceral warning against opening that back door. The cool metal of the doorknob, which moments before had promised a solution, now felt like a conduit to an unknown danger. I slowly, painstakingly backed away from the door, my movements as quiet as a phantom's. My eyes darted to a small window to the left of the door, a narrow sliver of glass overlooking the porch and a portion of the backyard. Keeping the interior lights off, I tilted the blinds with two trembling fingers, just enough to glimpse the scene outside without drawing attention to myself. What I saw solidified the terror that had been simmering beneath my skin. Two figures, cloaked in black, crouched low beneath my back door, their forms barely discernible against the deeper shadows of the porch. They were poised, ready to spring, like predators awaiting their prey. An ambush. My breath hitched, a silent gasp trapped in my throat. I must have stared too long, my disbelief a fatal flaw. One of the figures, with an unsettling fluidity, turned his head. His eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to pierce through the glass, locking onto mine. The shock was electric, a jolt that propelled me back from the window. The blinds snapped shut with a violent clatter. My hand flew to my phone, dialing 911 with a desperate urgency. I was halfway up the stairs when the first thud resonated from downstairs, followed by another louder crash against the back door. They were trying to break in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat echoing the frantic rhythm of my sprint towards the bathroom. The lock clicked into place with a flimsy reassurance, but it did little to quell the rising tide of panic. My lungs burned, each ragged breath a struggle against the suffocating fear that now enveloped me. I felt paralyzed, an overwhelming sense of helplessness washing over me. Moments later, a sickening crash from downstairs confirmed my worst fears. They were inside. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed through the silence of my home, a chilling symphony of invasion. Then, the rhythmic creak of the stairs, each step a closer approximation of danger. I held my breath, pressing myself against the cool tile of the bathroom wall as the footsteps advanced, drawing closer, closer, until they paused directly outside my door. The doorknob turned, ever so slightly, a silent, menacing twist. Then a deafening bang, followed by another, as if someone was throwing their full weight against the solid wood, attempting to splinter it from its frame. That was it. The final thread of my composure snapped. A primal scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate. The police are on their way. I shrieked, the words echoing with a shaky bravado I didn't feel. The banging stopped instantly. A muffled scuffle, then the rapid retreat of footsteps down the stairs. A few seconds later, a loud slam resonated through the house, followed by an eerie, profound silence. The police arrived shortly after, their flashing lights painting my quiet street in a macabre dance of blue and red. I recounted everything, my voice still trembling, the images of the child, the men in black, the forced entry replaying in my mind. But there was little they could do. No cameras, no clear descriptions. The only detail that seemed to pique their interest, to lend a flicker of seriousness to their otherwise detached expressions, was the involvement of the child. That kind of involvement, one officer had murmured, his gaze distant, suggests whoever these guys are, they're not just impulsive criminals. They're willing to go way further. That thought, that terrifying implication became the scariest part for me. The image of that small figure, a pawn in some sinister game, haunted my waking hours. Every possible explanation I conjured for the child's presence was equally sickening, equally disturbing. The police dismissed it as a random attack, but the elaborate nature of the scheme, the calculated precision, screamed otherwise. Nothing has happened since, and I've since moved on, but the lingering unease, the sickening uncertainty of that night remains. I can only hope against all odds that the child is safe. It's currently 2024 as I jot this down, barely a few weeks shy of graduation. I'm a senior, and the looming reality of adulthood is both exciting and terrifying. A brief rant, if you'll indulge me. I've never understood the allure of week-long spring break excursions to party havens like Miami. The chaos, the crowds, the relentless noise, it all grates on my nerves. So, for every year of college, spring break has been my sacred retreat, an excuse to simply go home and disconnect. This past spring break was no different. My plan was to go off-grid, to shed the grueling academic grind and the mind-numbing social drama that permeates campus life. I was particularly incensed, still fuming over a recent midterm. I'd crafted a flawless regrade request, meticulously detailing my arguments, only for my scummy TA to deny it without a shred of justifiable reason. But enough about that. It was a Monday morning, devoid of any specific plans beyond my morning workout. I've always been an early bird when it comes to exercise. It's the one constant that makes me feel like I have some semblance of control over my life. So, even though I was home for a week of supposed relaxation, my alarm was still set for 6 a.m., a harsh siren that dragged me from the depths of sleep. My logic was simple: get to the gym early, beat the rush, and reclaim my morning. By 6:20 a.m. I was dressed, out the door, and on the road. The drive to the gym was a familiar 15-minute journey, mostly along quiet back roads that wound through sleepy residential neighborhoods. Nothing ever happened out there, a comforting monotony that defined my childhood. It was a pleasant place to grow up, undeniably, but it had grown a little stagnant, a touch boring as my childhood friends gradually moved on with their lives, leaving me in the quiet rearview mirror of my own existence. I was cruising along, the gentle hum of YouTube beats filling the car, when something incongruous snagged my attention. An ice cream truck. It was parked along the curb, engine off, lights dark, a ghostly presence in the pre-dawn light. In the summer, perhaps, it wouldn't have registered as odd. But it was mid-March, still chilly, and the neighborhood kids were all safely tucked away in school. There was no logical reason for an ice cream truck to be sitting there at 6:30 in the morning. It looked utterly, profoundly out of place. As I drove past, I slowed just enough to glance through the driver's window. Empty. The sight lingered in my mind long after I rounded the corner and left it behind. It wasn't just the unseasonable timing, it was the unsettling realization that I couldn't recall ever seeing an ice cream truck in my neighborhood, not even when I was a kid. My area simply wasn't that kind of place. Despite the bizarre nature of the encounter, I quickly dismissed it, pushing it to the back of my mind as I focused on my workout. After the gym, I grabbed a quick bite, feeling a sense of accomplishment for having at least started my day productively. As I turned onto the familiar street that led to my house, my eyes instinctively scanned the curb. The ice cream truck. It was still there in the exact same spot. A flicker of unease, then annoyance. This was the kind of neighborhood where people were notoriously uptight, quick to call the authorities over minor infringements, especially if someone parked too long in front of their pristine lawns. I recalled a particularly grumpy woman who once gave my friends and me an earful for waiting in front of her house, even though we were just picking up a friend who lived next door. This anecdote, however trivial, solidified my expectation. Someone should have called the police about that truck by now. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in these quiet moments, got the better of me. Instead of heading straight home, I circled the block, an almost involuntary detour, drawn back to the anomaly. I needed to see if someone was inside, to dispel the unsettling feeling that had taken root. As I drove past for the second time, my slow pace must have been too obvious. The man in the front seat, a figure I now registered with a jolt, turned his head. His eyes, an unsettling intensity in their gaze, met mine for a few seconds. He looked off. His nose, long and almost comically pointed, protruded from a scraggly beard that appeared to have been untouched by a razor for years. He genuinely looked like someone who lived out of his vehicle, an image that sent a shiver of discomfort down my spine. The encounter settled a cold knot in my stomach. I drove straight home, the image of his eyes burned into my mind. My parents were at work, leaving me alone in the silent house, a space that now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a potential target. I spent the next few hours attempting to kill time, my mind replaying the unsettling encounter. Sometime in the afternoon, I ventured down the driveway to check the mail, a mundane task that usually required no thought. But as I reached the end, my gaze drifted down the street and my breath hitched. The ice cream truck. It was there again, parked across the street about 3 houses down. It wasn't facing me directly, but a chilling certainty washed over me. This was no coincidence. I froze, rooted to the spot, my mind grappling with the impossible. Had he really followed me home? The answer, cold and undeniable, echoed in my head. Yes. There was no other explanation. I snatched the mail and retreated inside, feigning nonchalance, desperate not to betray the surge of fear that threatened to overwhelm me. Once upstairs, I gravitated towards one of the guest bedrooms, its window offering a better vantage point of the street. I pulled the curtain aside, peering through the narrow gap. Sure enough, the ice cream truck remained a looming presence. I watched it for a few minutes, a silent vigil, but nothing happened. I wasn't sure what I expected to see, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. Eventually, the demands of the day broke my trance. I couldn't spend all afternoon staring out a window. I tried to focus on my laptop, but my mind was a restless sea. Every half hour, an uncontrollable urge pulled me back to the guest room, to the window. Each time, the ice cream truck was still there, but in a different spot. He was deliberately moving around the street. The thought of calling the police nagged at me, but what would I say? Nothing had actually happened. In hindsight, I wish I had listened to that instinct, wish I had either called them or simply ignored the truck. But curiosity, intertwined with a nascent fear, propelled me forward. My older brother was an avid birdwatcher, so I began rummaging through his room, searching for the binoculars I knew he kept somewhere. I found them, dusty and neglected, and hurried back to the guest room. With trembling hands, I pulled back the curtains and raised the binoculars to my eyes. The image snapped into focus, and I was utterly unprepared for what I saw. Through the driver's side window, the man from earlier was clearly visible. But he wasn't just sitting there. He was looking back at me, with his own pair of binoculars. As soon as he saw me, his binoculars dropped. He started the truck. He drove off. Horror, pure and unadulterated, washed over me. He had been spying on me, on my house, for the better part of 3 hours, after literally stalking me home. That was when I finally called the police, my voice a shaky whisper. I didn't know what I expected, but I had to do something. I explained everything: the circling ice cream truck, the man watching my house through binoculars, his sudden departure. The dispatcher, calm and professional, assured me they would send someone to patrol the area. She said an ice cream truck would be easy to spot, given its distinctive appearance. Then she hung up. I was left in a void of uncertainty. When my parents arrived home later, I recounted the day's bizarre events. They were concerned, of course, but their reassurances that it was probably nothing, that I shouldn't worry, did little to soothe my frayed nerves. Exhaustion eventually claimed me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke abruptly, an inexplicable jolt tearing me from my slumber. My hand instinctively reached for my phone. It was just past 3 a.m. I lay there trying to decipher what had disturbed my sleep when I heard it. Music. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, a ghostly echo in the dead of night. I strained my ears, and then, a cold dread began to solidify in my gut. The jingle of an ice cream truck. Before I could fully process the implication, a soft click against the glass of my bedroom window. Rocks. Someone was throwing rocks at my window. That had to be what woke me. The music alone was too faint. I lay frozen, staring at the wall, my mind screaming at me to look, to just get up and check. But my body, a traitor to my will, remained locked in a state of paralysis. Finally, with a monumental effort, I forced myself to move. I crept towards the window, positioning myself to the side. On the count of 3, I peeled back the curtain in one fluid motion, my eyes darting to the scene below. The man from earlier stood in the middle of my front yard, directly beneath my window, and on either side of him, holding his hands, were two small children. Or at least they appeared to be children, their forms too diminutive to be adults, though the darkness obscured any clear details. I didn't waste another second. Ignoring the frantic pounding in my chest, I backed away from the window and immediately went to wake my dad. I was already dialing 911 as he descended the stairs to investigate. My dad, a tough, no-nonsense man, would surely handle this. Unfortunately, the man had vanished in the few minutes it took us to get outside. The police arrived later, their investigation yielding nothing. A few days passed, then a few more, and I eventually had to return to school, but my parents promised me they'd remain vigilant. That was almost a month ago, and thankfully no strange occurrences have been reported since. But the reason I'm writing this now is because my mom called me a few days ago. There was a missing persons case just gone public in our hometown. Two 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had vanished from a neighborhood about 30 minutes from where we lived. The moment she said it, my mind reeled back to that night, to those two small figures standing on either side of the man in my front yard. The whole thing makes me sick to my stomach. Why would that man sit outside my house for hours, then throw rocks at my windows in the middle of the night? Why go to such lengths if he was involved in something as serious as a kidnapping? Perhaps he worried I had somehow caught on to what he was doing. But if he had truly taken those kids, wouldn't drawing attention be the last thing he'd want? And then there are the kids themselves. Were they already with him when I first saw the truck that morning, or were they somewhere else? I can't stop thinking about it. The only explanation I can conjure is that the type of person who would kidnap a child doesn't think like normal people do. Which is why that man would risk getting caught just to freak me out. My mom followed up with the police, attempting to shed some light on the case and our possible connection to it. If anything ever happens, I will send an update.